Hi everyone, it's Natalie here, and surprise, I know it's been a long time since I have done a Marielle video, but amazingly, I mean, really to my great surprise and delight, this series has continued over time to be one that folks return to and find valuable. And ultimately, as a teacher, or having the heart of a teacher, I can't see that and not say, "Oh, wonderful! If somebody's finding value, I've got to pick up and carry forward." And I've been meaning to for a long time now, and just hadn't quite gotten there. So welcome back. If you're watching this years in the future, which seems to have happened to some degree with some of the older videos, you'll notice that there was a big pause. Pandemic hit, and it's just not where I was. And a lot of things that I had ready to go and that I was excited about got put on a back burner, which sucks. But there we go. Fun times, and there are always things that we learn in the meantime. I will say I have not stopped working with or using the Marielle. And this is the second edition of it that was the first one that was sent to me. I think the first printing, which was really poorly done, but because it was the first deck I worked with, it has continued to be that one. So it's getting kind of gnarly. But it shuffles really easily and comfortably, and the cardstock is kind of papery and it does chip all over the place on the edges and so on, but there's something about a deck that gets fluffy that I really love. Now, if this had been a traditionally printed deck, like if it had been cardstock like this, I probably would not even see that. There wouldn't even be discoloration on the edges at this point, frankly, but it's not, is it? So it is what it is, isn't it? So that's that version of it. This is the first edition deck I had, and then there's the first edition that I have that's trimmed that I use just for myself. And this one is also a little bit worse for the wear. I don't use this one as frequently, and I think it shows. The reason being. Ultimately, the reason being, when I read on the lines, generally I don't use this one because it doesn't shuffle as easily. And that's one thing that you do if you're reading, one reading after the next, after the next, after the next, is that you've got to be able to switch, you've got to be able to shuffle quickly. And because of the size and so forth, this one's just not as easy. It's a little bit harder on the body. That said, it's also perfect for this, I think. We'll see. But I didn't feel like going out and getting the pretty version of, I've got it packed away for the moment, the prettier version of the second edition, just because it's a lot to do. So here we are. We've got the imperfectly perfect decks here. These are marked because when I do card counting, also known as the general reading, when I was learning, this is one of the decks I learned with. So it still has the numbers written on them. And I think we're good to go here. I also do have the cards pulled from the second edition. And you'll see, I mean, there's no real difference, perceptible difference between first and second editions for these, at least. For other cards in the deck, as we've learned already, there are. So let's talk about the 8's. They don't really resemble a lot of the 8 energy that we find in the RWS. There's an awful lot of differences, and since most people watching this are going to be RWS readers, I pulled out my Centennial RWS for reference. So we have here a wand, right? So we have the 8 of Wands. We have here the 8 of Swords, keeping in mind that with the Marielle, for those who are coming back to this perhaps, you know, like along with me, as opposed to those who just went, oh great, now there's an 8 and I just finished 7 a week or two ago. You know, be it remembered, we're working a little differently. We're working with spirit into thought, you know, or the initial spark into the thought that gives rise to the emotion or the heart that gives us the physical form, right? So she's working with a slightly different alchemical formula here. It is in the time since, interestingly, in the time since I started working on this, I have found many references in sort of well, within ceremonial magic. I was researching the lesser banishing ritual of the pentacle and a rationale for putting the elements in this order instead of the traditional one, right? So normally we're looking at wands, cups, swords, discs, and in there's another reference to the LBRP where they were put in this order. So she's not coming out of nowhere with this. In other words, you know, this is not just Marie White coming out with a different way of looking at this. Then we have, of course, the 8 of Cups. Bears no resemblance here, and it seems really, other than there being something long and vertical, you know, the yellow and the red, which is no accident, with the white, right? There isn't a huge amount of, you know, they don't really look anything like this. So for an RWS reader, this is going to feel really freaking intimidating, right? Let's just call it what it is. Let's just call it what it is. It's intimidating. And that's okay. That's okay. That's why we're going to break it apart and talk about why it actually reflects some of the elements of the RWS and the Thoth and the TDM or the Tarot de Marseille, right? In this deck, 8 is Justice, at which of course corresponds with air and the sign of Libra. Except if we look here, what are we seeing a lot of? Oh, could it be lions? And strength. So we have that kind of homage to lust here in the strength card. Right, so we can see here this is a lion's head. We've got a naked woman astride this lion, and she's holding what looks like a rosary, though there's no sort of Christianic cross on it. Similarly here, we have a naked woman astride a lion that's actually has the 4 faces of the tetragrammaton on it, or the tetragram. But again, here when we look at Justice, we've got a lot of the overlap of color. You know, we're clearly looking at a version of Mutt on the Justice card, or the Adjustment card, as it's known. In a traditional or more traditional, like a TDM deck, this is the Tarot de Maria Celia. But, you know, again, we've got the same numbering order. So there's a big deviation, obviously, then, right? We can figure out. There's a big change between what we have in the historical decks, and I love the Trionfi della Luna because Patrick Valenza is happily taking from, you know, some of these other more historical decks, like the Minchiate deck, where we have, like, the Pillar and the Justice card. But again, we've got this sort of animal lion-like form. That's definitely a lion's tail. When we look at the Marielle version of the 8's specifically, she talks in great detail about the overlap between strength and justice. Now, that's not something I had given the same kind of depth of thought to until coming to this deck, and until having an 11 year in 2020. And depending on which deck of cards you go to, you're either going to be finding that the 11 is strength or the 11 is justice. So which is it? Personally speaking, I found that it was both. 2020 was a strength justice kind of, year. It definitely tested all of our strength. And certainly social justice was something that came to the fore for most of us. Now, that was a personal year. 2020 was a personal year where these were the cards, just to be clear. But what I found was, these were things that came up during that year were things that somehow seemed to touch on a personal level in these two ways, right? So the overlay seemed to be doubled and strengthened. And it was a year of a lot of really heavy lessons, and personal work. But it was very clear to me that it was not, I got given a double whammy. It was a double whammy. I mean, where do I derive inner strength from? And in what way does justice play a role in the way that I meet with the world and work on myself? But it made me call into question, what is justice? When we look at Mott, who's known for weighing the heart and the feather, okay, having a feather light heart, and it is through, in some respects, through Mott and through the justice card that we have that that dichotomy, right? We have the scales of justice. Here we have some scales of justice. Okay. Here we go. Here's the scales of justice, but not through Mott. Okay. It's an interesting dichotomy. So we've got this versus that. If your heart is as light as a feather, so if the balance is there, your soul moves to the better place. If your heart is not as light as a feather, if it's heavier than the feather, your soul goes to the other place. When we talk about lions, we're talking about courage. I love the turn of phrase that the French use, bon courage. Good heart, good courage, good, they say good luck, but when I hear, bon courage, what I think of is really like have great heart, have great courage, to be lion-hearted. I think of Richard the Lionheart. So the strength comes from vulnerability. And in most tarot decks, as Marie White points out in the 8's, when she talks about this, she mentions the correlation between the story of Hercules and the lion, and the way in which most tarot decks in some form are playing out that story when you look at the strength card. So we have strength, we have heart in both of these. Even here we see, even though there is no scale and we don't see the heart being weighed, she has placed Mott's hands in a cross over the heart. There's so much symbolism we could talk about here, guys, and I'm trying to keep it together. There's always so much, right? So the heart and courage and the strength of the heart, having a heart that is light or that is not burdened by misdeeds. So it is light as a feather and can become like spirit, can ascend. Certainly if you were on a jury or you were making a major decision that affects the lives of so many others, one would hope sincerely that the heart and the mind would be, you know, I'm thinking in terms of cups and air, right? One would hope that the heart and the mind would be at peace with one another. You know, that the decision was not purely rational and ignoring the wisdom of the heart, or that the decision was not heart-based only and ignoring rational thought, rationality in general, or evading the rules of natural law. Because if that's the case, that heart is going to be heavy in a way that is not going to move it forward. Similarly here, you know, we have this spiritual component, you know, the spirit and the heart aligned together. You know, the eye, if you look here, the eye and that ring, that pearl, you know, the wisdom of the heart and mind in balance is what I see there. Yeah. So as you can see, there are already, when we go into talking about these cards, there are already correlations and correspondences between these two cards which pair them, which bring them together. Let's look at these minors. Let's look first at this Eight of Wands. So Eight of Wands is a card I remember when I was, I mean, this is going back to what, 1997, probably. 1997 was when I went to do my, certified CTA, certified tarot, CTR, certified tarot reader level with the American Tarot Association. And I remember trying to come up with a key word for this card felt impossible, because what I really wanted to say was overwhelm or too fast or everything coming at you at once, which of course are all completely valid. But I found, frankly, at that moment in my life, so, you know, the meanings of tarot so overwhelming that I think at that time I couldn't have come up with it anyway, you know. I struggled. I think I settled on the key word, interestingly, from the Thoth, which is swiftness, right? So in the Thoth, we're looking at something that's so quick and so fast. It's on the light scale, you know. It's the prism. It's a prismatic light scale, right? And of course, we have the association with Mercury or Hermes and Sagittarius. Interesting, because I'm a Sagittarius. But yeah, this kind of makes this rendering. I think this is a very poor rendering of a card. I always have. I've never liked it very much, just to be honest. And when I look at the decks that people make when they're making a similar deck, RWS based deck, and they work with this symbolism, it irritates me because I feel like they haven't gone far enough to really uncover what this Eight of Wands really means. And that means doing a lot more research. So this is a very different Eight of Wands. Very, very different Eight of Wands. So what we have is we have this amazing red lion that's clearly made of fire. We have the fire here at the top. We have the wings, and she talks about the wings here being like the cloak of the magician. Okay, this is another moment where she references the magician, and I feel like we need to have our magician pulled out. Now we're gonna have a glorious mess by the end of this one, kids. All right, so so here's our magician. So she talks, oh, how wonderful. That made me, you see, that, and I've been reading this, I've been contemplating, you know, but what I'm seeing now is the drape of this magician's cloak, which I never saw before just now. So the drape of that cloak would mean if it were opened up, it would open up into points like the ends of angels' wings, which of course, if they were dropped down, would hang down lower at the front. Oh my gosh. Look at that. Woman, you are so brilliant, it hurts. Okay, so this is supposed to be, she says, the magician's wings, or rather a cloak, opened up like angelic wings, making each of these thingies here, okay, 4 elements, right? So the magician has the 4 elements, feathers, and within each of these peacock feathers, as she points out, she's got all 4 of the elements. So there are 4 of them, and each peacock feather represents all 4 elements. You know, so we've got fire, it's a feather, so that's the air. Then inside the eye, or, you know, they're gold, so that's earth. And then we have fire and water inside each. She doesn't specify that, but that seems apparent to me. Then we've got, what other magician reference do we have? We've got a lemniscate, okay, in the form of a snake. She loves her snakes. Lemniscate, here we have the lemniscate above the magician, but she mentions the belt of the magician in this card. Anybody see the belt of the magician? There'll be a few of you who've probably done coloring books or read something by Mary K. Greer or something. I never knew this until probably 2 years ago, 2019 maybe, because I'd never seen it that closely or clearly. In the, here we are pulling out, here we go. If you look closely in the RWS, the belt the magician is wearing is indeed a snake. So if you have an RWS at home, go home and look at it, open it up, you'll find you've got a snake in there. Similarly, color-wise, I should have thought of this. But you know, you don't think of everything. Look at the colors we've got here. The yellow and the red, right? And then who's wearing white or represented by a white color? This person snuggled in here underneath. So the way that she describes this one in the book is to say that the person here is in fact the magician. So it's us, right? And the soul is our soul is what's being represented, or our spirit, by the lion version of the magician, right? So this magician really carries the potential of our soul to become greater than itself. And we have the dichotomy of rest. You know, she's rested, she's cloaked, she's held, she's safe. And why? Because she is trusting the power, the energy, the magnificence of her own soul and her familiarity with it and its infinite power enough to be carried by it, to rest beneath it. Because this red here, we've got one lion's paw and one human hand. Go home and look at your deck. You know, look at your cards. This hand is human. This one's a big lion paw. And she's being carried by that and held. So the words, or the phrase that I have as the key words that I use to unlock this particular card is trust the process. Because what do we have back here? She's in the void. You know, she's being held by herself. She's holding herself on a spiritual level. Her soul is what carries her. Her courage, right? Her great courage, her great strength, her united heart and mind are what carry her through the void. Because what do we have in this magician's card? We have this void. So, of course, as usual, we've got a combination going on here between stuff Nat is correlating and stuff that Marie White actually says. But you know, this is how tarot works, isn't it? On us, on all of us, we're here to look at what's there, what's really here, what do we see? You know, I feel strongly that Marie White was tapping into something really profound and powerful when she created this deck, and it's only, you know, that's only become clearer and clearer as time goes by because of the way it seems to unfold within me. It marries together the two decks that I started with in life, right? So the first deck I ever had was a TDM, a Grimo TDM. So just the red and blue and kind of yellow primary color version, and the RWS was the second deck I ever had, and it really was the one I worked with the most. But those two systems or ways of understanding the tarot are indeed the ones that I know the best. The gap for me, of course, was the Thoth. And in the time since I've been working with the Marielle and started wanting to work with or learn the Thoth, this deck has unlocked that for me greatly, which is wonderful. Now, you know, if we think about these 8s as a journey, and I think it's helpful to do so, what we'll find immediately is that, you know, as we have this wonderful divine spark of the soul, right, that leads us to this place, right, recognizing that we exist both on the earth as a person and as or with or beside our great, you know, holy guardian angel, or our soul itself, the essence of who we are that is beyond the physical plane. We then get trapped in the mind. It's natural. We get very, very trapped in the mind, don't we? So we have these swords here forming the gate, you know, that are vertical. Okay, we've got this towering, you know, edifice, or yeah, towering edifice in the background here. It's not so far away here. Here we're already up on top of the hill. We're not locked down here in the you know, swamp. See, I look at this and I see the landscape. This card, to me, is somebody walking up and approaching this tower from over here, because down here is where the shore is, you see? So she's standing somewhere down here on the landscape. Anyway, things we think of. But, you know, if you're thinking about entering the card, right? If you entered the card and you're looking at what's all around inside that card, first of all, this is a landscape I think feels much more enticing than this one. But, yeah, there's always a lot of things you can uncover if you step inside the card and look around at the landscape. Give yourself a 360. So we've got, and the gate is slightly ajar. Okay, there's no lock on this gate. It's open, it's inviting. That tower looks beautiful. Everything beyond this gate looks auspicious and fabulous. And of course, anytime we see something that looks like this, we've got to go beyond it, right? But what is it? It's a portal. It's a portal. Again, we're looking at duality. She talks about the duality in this card. She carries it forward into this one as well. How do we know? Here's a good one. How do we know that we've got to go through that portal to the other side? Synchronously, right? And the soul and the heart, everything about us looks for these overlaps. It wants them, it needs them desperately. We know that it's best to go beyond these gates and into that castle, because on the other side of the gate, the color of that soul from the other card is in the roses. It beckons to us. The path itself is the color of our skin, represented in this card. Of course, it's not the color of everybody's skin, let's be real. It's the color of this magician's skin in this particular card, who looks like a small child, right? Small female child. And when we get to the gateway, it's sort of this same color and gold. So we've got to go through that gate. It's important that we do so. Above this portal, we have like a sun kind of looking structure up here. I wonder if it got cut out in the other version of the deck. Let's look. Yes. Yep. It's almost not even there. Yeah, it's almost not there in the second edition. It's a little clearer here what it is. I think, yeah, in the second edition you can't quite tell what it is you're looking at up there at the top. That's sad. There's so many things that got cut off, and yet we all wanted to take the borders off the cards anyway, right? It's tough. It's a tough one. But there we have a sun. So there's something about our realization that lies through these gates. Remember, it's a prison of the mind. Those are the key words. I have to remember to put the links and everything here in the video, so that if you need to access any of that stuff again, or if you've never accessed it, it's available. But I put all of the keywords and so forth in documents so that they can be accessed. So, yeah, something about our realization lies beyond this. Ooh, if we look here on either side of the gate, another clue which, you know, the unconscious mind might pick up if we were standing inside that card, and the conscious mind would immediately assimilate if it, you know, were conscious. We have two pillars. We have B, we have J. But in this case, instead of Boaz and Yachim or Jachim, we have Babylon and Jerusalem. So we still have that duality. Right? On one side we have the chaos, on the other side we have a sort of a beautifully organized city of the soul. But either way, we have to make that movement forward and change our mind and get past whatever this gate is. And it's never as hard as it might seem. All you have to do, these aren't even that heavy, right? You pull that gate open and you go through. It's already partially open, ever so slightly, because we're supposed to go through it, right? She does point out in the book that if you go through these gates, your life will never be the same again afterwards. So it is a major moment of change. If there's on the off chance that there is a theater nerd watching, a major theater nerd, the moment of change that I feel is in this is very similar to what we find with Bertolt Brecht. You know, there's always a moment in his plays and in his plays with music. We think of them in the United States as musicals, but when he wrote them, he did not see them that way. But he always put characters, like, for example, in the Caucasian Chalk Circle, she has to make a choice at various moments in scenes throughout the play, where she either decides to take the baby Michael and carry on, or desert him and save herself. And every time, you know, she gets the happily ever after because she chooses altruistically all the way through the play. So moving on, then we get to the Hercules card. I think it would be good to pull out the book and read this chunk to you, so I'm going to do that. But what we seem to have here is a young person, and the young person is wearing lion's robes. This is not, for me, it is not the same as this card. The interpretation here is very, very different. It is for all of these. This deck interprets very specifically and originally, but it includes, as I'll explain in a moment, it does include the RWS meanings. It's just that's not all it includes. It includes so much more than just the RWS meanings. Okay, so in the RWS, this person has made their choice to move to the other shore, to go on a higher journey, to raise their vibration and frequency and seek something that is personal and deep and which goes beyond what they had previously known before. So they are no longer satisfied with the status quo, with what was their, with what was theirs. And it looks like with this 8, they would have had a lot, right? 8 is often in numerology, it's a number of money and business and success. So they may even be moving towards something with poverty and so on. We just don't know. With this 8 of Cups, different discussion. More often than not, is he going to marry me? I'm going to say with this 8 of Cups, no, he's not. Because we have a child embodying, it's a child in lion's clothing. It's someone who aspires to have this lion on top of them, but they haven't got the courage. They just haven't really got the courage inside. Now that's on a very mundane level, folks. Very mundane. Because if you look at or have downloaded at some point the list of keywords that I use for the Marielle, the keywords here are trust in vulnerability. In other words, having an open heart and the courage to be vulnerable is what will save the day. You're being asked to be vulnerable. You're being asked to have the courage to be authentic. And authenticity often brings with it great vulnerability. And it's a Cups card, right? So the vulnerability is the heart. It's the emotions. It is wearing the heart on the sleeve. We have that little sparkle there on her wrist. I don't think she ever addresses that sparkle in the book. But if we think of the heart as being the spark, that, or the place that holds the soul, that little spark of the soul is what's out in the open. If the question on a mundane level is, trying to remember some of the questions that I get where this has popped up, anything like where it requires the guy, the man in the relationship to step up and do better, the tendency in the reading is that this means no, he won't. He won't have the courage to step up. I don't know why that is. It doesn't come up that way in other readings. When I'm doing more like a general reading and we're discussing, it's in person or online, and we're really talking about the nitty-gritty of life and decision-making and what am I going to do about my career. What do I do in this meeting with my boss where I need to go and ask him for a raise? The 8 of Cups is going to say, if the 8 of Cups is part of that answer, you're going to do better by being authentic and vulnerable and being truthful about where you are right now and what you're needing than you would by trying to pretend that you're braver and stronger than you actually feel. In other words, do you see what I'm saying? That the dichotomy of this vulnerability of this child, along with its childish or childlike nature, combined with the robe of a lion, either protecting it or empowering it, is where we get that depth and richness from. Okay? So either it's someone who aspires to the lion's robes and just can't get over their childish nature in order to really inhabit them fully, or it's someone who is very straightforward about being vulnerable, and the lion's robes give them the courage to speak their truth and simply be who they are and move forward. Yeah. Now, what she says about this one is interesting. I'm just going to pull this out because I think it's pretty good stuff. Sorry about that. So she writes, Hercules was a demigod, the son of Zeus, and the mortal woman, oh boy, Alcmene. Oof, never pronounced that one out loud before. Not sure whether I've given it any justice or not. Hera, jealous of her husband Zeus's infidelity, plagued Hercules his whole life and tragically caused him to go into a blind rage and kill his wife and 3 children as an adult. Devastated, he sought out redemption for this horrible crime. The Oracle of Delphi led him to a course of atonement through 12 tasks known as the labors of Hercules. His first task was to kill the Nemean lion. The lion had an impenetrable skin, so Hercules was unable to kill it with his arrows. In some variations of the myth, he strangled the lion, in some he clubbed it to death, and in some he shot his arrows into its vulnerable mouth. Each of these scenarios can be seen in both modern and antique strength or fortitude cards. Hercules wore the skin thereafter, and it was part of his iconography. Here, Hercules' lion skin is draped over a young and innocent child to symbolize that strength or fortitude is due to an open heart and lack of bitterness. The 8 is a mirror, and the outside world reflects the inside world. The best way to overcome obstacles at this junction is to keep your heart open and be true to yourself and overcome the fear that would normally cause you to shut down and guard your heart. Wear truth and love like an impenetrable and radiant shield. And then she quotes the prayer of St. Francis. Fascinating, right? So again, we see this interpretation brought to life even more clearly through this one. And through seeing this one here, I feel as though I have a greater insight into this one. Because we're still looking at a lion. We're still looking at an open, I can put the book down. We're still looking at an open heart. Typical to Crowley, we're talking about reaching that open heart through through sexual ecstasy. That vulnerability is not just from the heart, it's through sexual vulnerability and the alchemical nature of sex and of orgasm and ecstasy, right? Finally, what do we have here? We have our 8 of discs. At the top, we have another, I think that's an 8. Yeah, it's an 8-sided star, kind of like we've got down here, or over here in this 8 of swords, right? We've got these 2 lions, right? We've got the red and yellow against one another with a lamb and that white in between. Okay, so after all of this, right, after everything that we've looked at so far, here's where justice and strength come together in one card. right? Absolutely. We get a taste of that in the Eight of Wands, right? Where we have the dichotomy of the soul and the physical self. You know, the magician really being almost not crushed, but because he's not, obviously, but being put, you know, there's an alchemical process taking place here, and it has to be trusted. The Eight of Swords, we have the mind. You know, we have the battle of the mind to move beyond a belief, a concept, an idea, you know, of who and what we are and who and what we're worth in order to move on to the highest possible place, which comes about in the nines, right? And then we have, after dealing with the treachery of the mind, right, and the obstacles of the mind, we come to the heart, where we've got to discover what it is to be vulnerable, to have literally wear the heart and the seal of the heart on our sleeve, and act from a place of courage and vulnerability. Then we get to the Eight of Discs. And here we have the result. You know, we're always on a journey in these suits. In the Marielle, always on a journey. And here in the journey, we get to the place where, well, where we are the lamb. And ultimately, what do we have here? Remember what I said at the beginning about this being the sun, right? This star shape and this star shape. She's making sure that we're reminded here with this 8-pointed star that this is the sun. She's even connected them. So she says in the book that essentially what we're looking at here is the pure white light of the soul or the sun or the heart. And these two lions are protecting this lamb. They're not fighting over it. They're here to protect it. She also references, interestingly, this is an interesting one that she would even throw this in, kind of given where she's going here and the power of this image. But she does throw out the sphinxes, you know, in the riddle of the Sphinx, which is ultimately a reference, from, at least for me, it's a reference to Oedipus Rex, where, you know, the story of Oedipus is that he goes into the gates of the city, and he cannot go into the gates of the city unless he's able to, of Thebes, you know, unless he's able to solve the riddle of the Sphinx. And most people don't manage to solve it, and they're eaten by it or thrown off the city walls, and, you know, they die or whatever. But Oedipus realizes that the answer to the riddle of the Sphinx is that what's being described is the journey of man. That said, she mentions too the idea that we've swallowed the sun, and that the sun shines out of us like this pure light. And in fact, I feel like we could probably read this one, because again, she's weaving together all of the imagery from the Justice card, the Strength card. You know, she's wrapping it all together into this last one. She says the Eight of Discs is the sun into the vulnerable mouth of the immortal lion, to the very center of our physical selves. So there we are with discs, right? We swallowed the sun, and there it sits, a lamb, the image of that which is most white, most pure, most innocent, and lacking in bitterness. Let's see. This is the mercy seat upon the Ark of the Covenant, flanked by two flaming and blazing seraphim wearing crowns of shins and wearing the marks of who is like God and Lion of God. It's the house of the heart that will be weighed by Mot at the end of life. Okay, so I would say if this is the heart that's going to be weighed by Mott at the end of life, you've done a good job. It's probably, you know, it's so white and it's so tiny. It's a baby lamb. It's going to be lighter than the feather, or as light as the feather. Yeah, to go on to immortality, your heart must be light, not heavy and not dark. Light, radiant, shining, a star. Your body filled with the sun, a spiritual chariot. Remember Helios and his chariot? So there's a Greek reference in that she's not speaking aloud, but which is inherent in the chariot. And so I happen to have pulled the chariot along with all of these other cards. Here we go. So do we see there the light that she's talking about? Right? This is a spiritual chariot. The chariot that can embrace the dark long enough to be able to understand it, and the light that shines on it ultimately is what obliterates it. Right? We used to say in the temple when I was in seminary, we used to talk about how, you know, as like we would make the analogy for beginner meditators that, you know, there's always a light somewhere in the darkness. You know, when you're in the temple at night and all of the lights are off and so forth, where is there light? Well, you can see it creeping in through the windows because somewhere there's a light on. And, you know, that goes on to say that no matter how dark things are for you, no matter how dark your soul feels, the minute that your attention is turned toward that which is light, you're no longer in the dark. Right? So in this analogy, the spiritual chariot is that which is so light, light as in, you know, sunlight, or light as in doesn't weigh very much light. Okay? And that's forms the spiritual chariot of the heart. You like that? She knows how to weave it all together, doesn't she? She's got it pulled together. We just have to look at it and examine it. The sun has to pass the flaming lion's gate of the riddling sphinxes, who will strangle you if you are wrong. Right? So I guess these are the riddling sphinxes, but they're also the seraphim. You know, he who is like God and he who, and Lion of God, right? Then she says, the sun inside will become the flame in the lamp of the hermit. So she's setting us up on this last card, as she often does, for the way forward with the deck, with the journey. So there's a lot in there, folks. There's a lot in there. I hope this was helpful. I really hope this was helpful in terms of reconciling justice and strength, but also the journey of the wands, or sorry, the journey of the minors. Thank you once again, everybody who has been paying attention and who's been finding these videos useful. I'm grateful for you. You got me up off my butt to carry it on and keep moving forward. So very exciting. Take care, friends, and I will see you again in the next one. Bye.